Chapter 12 Daydreams. On the morning of November 2nd, the 13th day at sea, they brought the rafts close again and dug in Alex's pocket for his wallet. They took his identification tag from around his neck. Cherry held on to both in the hope that he would be able to return them to Alex's family. Bartek asked if he could have Alex's leather jacket to help keep him warm at night. Rigor mortis had set in, and Alex's limbs were rigid. It took Bartek several minutes to wrestle the jacket free of the body. No one discussed the prospect of using the corpse for food. DeAngelis murmured what he remembered of the Catholic burial service. "I consign your body to the sea and your soul to the Lord," he said in conclusion. Then they rolled Alex's body over the side and into the ocean. He floated face down for some time before the men lost sight of him. With Alex gone, a new kind of gloom settled over the rafts. For 2 weeks they had imagined their own deaths. Now the prospect was real. Alex had been the weakest of the group from the start, but could the rest of them be far behind? Reynolds had probably lost a third of his body weight and looked more dead than alive. Bartek was a skeletal mass of salt ulcers and roasted skin. Rickenbacker seemed to be running on bile alone. DeAngelis was in better shape than everyone, except Whitaker and Cherry, but he took Alex's death especially hard. He had only known the kid for 2 weeks, but he'd spent the better part of that time virtually sitting in his lap and watching while he wasted away. Now DeAngelis lost all faith in their chances, and that made him a terrible raft mate for Rickenbacker. The two of them started arguing almost as soon as DeAngelis climbed in, and DeAngelis didn't have the patience for it. He asked to trade places with Reynolds. If it was going to end soon, he wanted to be with his captain, Bill Cherry. Around the 14th day, another storm overtook them, and they collected water with practiced skill. Rickenbacker transferred their hoard in his mouth from bucket to vest, and he could feel his raft mates watching to make sure he didn't swallow. Someone grumbled that the process was taking too long. After the storm, the weather grew dead calm. When DeAngelis joined Cherry and Whitaker, it put the three strongest men in one raft. That gave Cherry an idea. He and his raft mates, he announced, were going to cut loose from the others. The current at this point seemed to be pushing them steadily north. If the three of them put all their remaining strength into the oars, they might be able to get back on the southwest course, and that would carry them away from the Japanese, toward the Ellice Islands, Fiji, and survival. In any case, Cherry insisted, spreading out would give the search planes, assuming they were still up there, a better chance of finding them. Rickenbacker was furious. Their best hope lay in the staying together. He was convinced of it. They'd be easier to see from the sky. They needed one another for support, and besides, without Cherry and Whitaker, no one had the strength to pull a man back in the raft if someone went overboard. When Cherry refused to bend, Rickenbacker tried to pull rank. "I forbid you to go," he said. "Under what circumstances?" Cherry said. "I'm a colonel," Rickenbacker shot back. "I'm ordering you not to go." Cherry and Whitaker reminded Rickenbacker that his rank made no difference, because he wasn't in the army. He was a civilian acting under orders from the Secretary of War. Adamson mustered enough strength to insist that he was an acting colonel, which put him in charge. He was ordering them not to go. "I am in charge of the airplane," Cherry shot back. "That means I'm in charge of this trip until we get back to land." The entire argument seemed ridiculous to DeAngelis. They weren't getting back to land. Not now, not tomorrow, not next week. Rickenbacker and Adamson were fighting with their last ounces of strength to call themselves captains of a sinking ship. Rickenbacker finally gave in and watched while Cherry, Whitaker, and DeAngelis drifted into the distance. The three men pointed themselves toward the southwest and took turns with the oars, 2 people rowing, while one rested. Several hours later, they were still visible, maybe a mile away. Exhausted from the effort, all 3 men fell sound asleep. When they awoke, they paddled slowly back and tied onto the other 2 rafts. The argument and the effort had all come to nothing. In the brutal calm, time slipped past like the sea, with no milestone or benchmark. There was only the relentless cycle of blinding sun and terrifying darkness, scorching heat and bone-chilling cold. Simple tasks now required superhuman effort. Blowing up the sidewalls of a raft now took 2 of them more than 2 hours. Every now and then they would try again to paddle toward the southwest. No one had the strength to keep at it. After a few minutes, they would collapse against the sides of the rafts and give in to the still water. Occasionally, they stumbled onto a paltry ration of food. At one point, 2 silvery fish jumped into one of the rafts to escape a shark, and the men were on them in seconds. On another day, thousands of fingerlings, juvenile fish the size of a finger, swept past the boat in sheets. The water was so dense with fish that the men were able to grab a few with their bare hands. The unlikely fingerlings were swallowed whole while they were still alive. After the last storm, they had nearly a gallon of water stored in the life vests. It felt good to have a reserve, but they still doled it out in 1 or 2 ounce portions, twice a day. The tiny amount barely freed the tongue from the roof of the mouth for a few minutes. It was nowhere near enough to stave off the ravages of dehydration. Under normal conditions, blood feeds the brain with the oxygen it needs to function. Now, with such a paltry supply of water, the amount of blood in each man's body dwindled. Their veins shrank, and their brains began to starve for oxygen. Dehydration sent the men into bouts of delirium. Day and night, they drifted in and out of a dream state, the line between sleep and wakefulness vanishing first. Hallucinations crept into the hours when they were fully awake. One night, before he moved into Rickenbacker's boat, Reynolds sat up and whispered to Whitaker, "Say, I guess you know about DeAngelis and Cherry. They land on a secret island and get themselves a quart of water, and they don't come back and sit in the boat. Shh, don't let the captain hear that." Rickenbacker woke up in a stupor and overheard Reynolds. "Well, I'll be darned," Rickenbacker yelled. "If anybody has an island, they better take me." Every night, Rickenbacker had his own island dreams. Usually, they just happened to land in a place where an old friend had a beautiful house. The friend took him in, gave him a comfortable bed, and served him fruit juice. In the morning, all he'd have to do was wake up, reach for the phone, and call the Secretary of War, Stimson, who would dispatch a plane to fly him home to Adelaide. Instead, he woke up in 3 inches of salt water, wedged between 2 starving men, and floating in the middle of the Pacific. Bartek thought he was truly going crazy. The clouds transformed into people and animals, hovering over the raft, a chicken, a giant bird, a woman with a dog in her lap. He drifted in and out of daydreams. In the strange space between asleep and awake, Bartek's family visited him in the raft. His mother appeared and told him he would have to rely on God. His sister Ruth, who had died 6 weeks ago, told him she was okay, and he would be, too.